I think about these days. All I think about these days is getting at that goal that's in my heart. I need a reason to believe, yeah, maybe a cure for my disease.
That song is by Blaine Long. My name is Matthew Blades. Meet my friends.
Hi, it's Tim.
And Beth from the Mulhausen Group Real Estate.
We are so proud to sponsor another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. You can catch us at tmgphoenix.com.
That's a good group of people right there. Hi, it's Matthew Blades, host of Learn from People Who Lived It. And a reminder before we get into today's show that each of these episodes is presented uninterrupted with the support of the Mulhausen Group, with the support of ASI or Advanced Systems Integrations. They design and install cutting-edge audio and visual equipment. So if you're on the IT staff or you're the IT director, please reach out to ASI. This audio visual integrator has offices in Minnesota and in Scottsdale and 2 decades of experience. And the cool thing about them, they pay real close attention to that last 5%, which is the one that drives you and I crazy. We've got a link to ASI in our show description, or you can go there yourself by visiting asi-av.com.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, my name is Christina, and I'm 67.
Christina, what story are you here to share?
You're going to hear a lifelong story of extreme trauma and abuse.
Who do you hope hears this?
Anyone who has been through severe abuse and trauma and is trying to make their way through it, for them to know that you can take your life back. You can get your life back.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. And there could be a lot to learn from this woman today. Dr. Frank Bavacqua, as always, alongside. Hi to you, sir.
Hello.
A lot of people use the word trauma. A lot of people use the word abuse. Very, very seldomly do you hear people go extreme trauma. And that's something you did. I know for you, Christina, there's a lot of different starting points, but I like to start with that 0 to 10. Give me an idea of who you were as a little girl and the kind of things that you saw growing up, family dynamics. If you don't mind, let's just start there.
You got it. I grew up, Matthew and Dr. Frank, in a very, very dysfunctional home. My mother was violent and severely mentally ill, and she inflicted horrific physical and emotional abuse upon me for as long as I can remember and pounded the living daylights out of me. And as a young girl, I didn't know how to cope with this extreme abuse. And I did everything and anything to appease her aggression, getting the perfect grades, cleaning the house, being the perfect daughter. And I had no voice, but I had to completely suffer in silence. So, Matthew and Dr. Frank, instead of love, security, and emotional attachment, I lived in a constant state of fear, dread, and sheer terror of when would be the next time she would beat me and yell at me. Tension was so high in the home that I didn't know how to cope with this stress. And so as a young girl at the age of 4, I started pulling out all of my hair to the point of having to wear wigs in my adult life. I was also prescribed barbiturates at a young age for me to sleep because I never knew when she would come in and beat me with such a ferocity. I was the only daughter, the second of 4 children, and my mother greatly favored my 3 brothers, who could do no wrong in her eyes. My father was kind and supportive, but knew nothing of this extreme physical and verbal abuse. And if I dare mention it, I would receive further retribution from my mother. Now, we must remember that child abuse was pushed under the carpet in the 1950s when I was growing up. So she was a domestic terrorist and a tyrant, really, of the worst kind. And for me, truthfully, no mother would have been better. So as a consequence of all this, I had no self-worth. My anguish and suffering were palpable, and the holes in my heart would take a lifetime to repair. So again, she denied me the basic rights a child would have of love, peace, security, and feeling safe. Now, my father became my ego support. And when it was time for me to go to college, he insisted I become a doctor, which I did not want to become. He was the child of the Great Depression and only saw doctors have food on their tables who bartered their services for food. But most importantly, he wanted me to be self-sufficient and not rely on a man for anything. And little did I know how much those words would portend. So I very dutifully felt like a lamb going to slaughter. I got straight A's. I got accepted into medical school. And then, so that was the childhood background.
Well, I want to hit the pause button right there because you blow by that. Dr. Frank, you have the DR in front of your name. It's no easy feat to just go to medical school to just get good grades. Like you dust over that, Christina, and that's
right. Like it's super easy, and
I know.
We all can do it without trying.
What people do. No, that's not what most people do. That's extraordinary, and that's something you did. But yeah, I think that's worth talking about, don't you, Dr. Frank?
Yeah. I mean, if I could have become a real doctor, like I might have tried to do that too, but I couldn't. So I just became a psychologist instead. It's not easy for everyone.
And what a thing to grow up. And you said something in there, by the way, Christina, that just struck a chord with me, almost hit me across the face, which is no mother would have been better. Okay. So
well, I want to.
Where should we go next?
Well, I want to go on to the next saga, but I want your listeners to know that there's hope and there was restoration, and I'm going to get to that at the end with my mother and how just how that played out. So we're going to just put that on hold, and then I'm in medical school, going back to medical school, and once in medical school, I meet a man who was a lawyer. And my father saw very troubling aspects to his character and knew his father who had been problematic and strongly advised I stay away from him, which I clearly should have done. But everything in me, Matthew and Dr. Frank, wanted to escape, just escape. There was so much strife in my Mediterranean household about me dating this man. And in this milieu, I became very close with my mother-in-law, who was a Christian. And she asked me if I would join a small prayer meeting held at the local hotel and just get prayer because there was so much strife going on in the families. Well, okay, I did. I went up for prayer and I felt the most peace I ever had in my life. So upon returning back to medical school, I very quietly prayed for a paralyzed child on the neurology ward, and I saw him get up and walk. And needless to say, this was a very transformative experience for me to see. So after seeing this, I really wanted out of medical school, which I never wanted to begin with. So I took a 6-month sabbatical, but you guessed it, my big non-fat Greek family became even more upset that I would consider the thought of dropping out of medical school. So as we fast forward, I get married to this man against my father's will, and then I tell everyone, after medical school, guys, this is going to be it for me as a doctor. Do we all understand that? This is going to be it. Now, this husband, number one, was a veritable wolf in sheep's clothing that my father saw, but I was blinded to. He became very egotistical and even more narcissistic and represented very, very famous basketball players, which you would know. I was nothing more than a trophy wife, and he insisted after marriage, get this, that I go on to residency, which I did not want to do. He even tried choking me to death to tell me I had to go to residency. Now, never once did it dawn on me I had the right to walk away. In residency, I once again felt like this dutiful lamb going to slaughter, but would always try to do what was right by my patients, that's for sure. The monster husband, however, would bring his tax returns to the hospital when I was on call for me to sign, which was totally surreal. After residency was through, after 3 years of internal medicine, I was just exhausted in every way and wanted to rest. But what ensued, Matthew and Dr. Frank, would stretch the minds of Hollywood horror producers. He got in his diabolical mind that he did not like how close I became with his mother and that I quietly shared my faith. If he even overheard the words, Jesus, he would become unglued, and over the course of when I met him those 10 years, would throw both his mother and me into a mental institution for our faith and pay off the same cash cow psychiatrist to declare us both mentally ill. So even if I prayed with a friend on the phone, it would have to be away from his listening ears. Dr. Frank and Matthew, you can trust God for all the times he was allowed to do this. If ever my medical colleagues, nurses, or ancillary medical staff ever witnessed any aberrant behavior or conversation, I would have gotten pulled aside. This never happened because there weren't any. This was intense religious persecution right here in America, as well as horrific psychiatric abuse. And again, never once did it enter my mind, I don't need to put up with this. I can just walk away. So continuing on, in 1989, we received countless IRS notices in the mail for tax evasion and inappropriate deductions, that we were being jointly held responsible for this horrific debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars with interest and penalties. And at the same time, concurrently, all of his famous ball players leave him for financial mismanagement. He wants to go take any assets he has and go overseas and hide them. And I'm just finding out all about this in the mail and stuff. And I become incensed with this for not wanting to come clean and tell the IRS the truth. In addition, he was leading a very dark life in many other ways besides this. So he concocts a final scheme to get rid of me once and for all. He got a family member to help him kidnap and abduct me and throw me back into the same mental institution with the same cash cow psychiatrist as I was getting ready for work. No one knew where I was, my family, my friends, and he paid the psychiatrist this time for me to get 7 electroshock treatments like he had done with his mother 37 times. After 2 months of this hell, when I got released, I fled with my life to Phoenix, where my parents lived. But in Arizona, I had no rest. My mother was ballistic that now I had somehow shamed the family because I wanted a divorce, if you can believe this. Now, all I knew was I had to keep dancing, and was diagnosed at the same time, just as I'm starting to put one foot in practice and just get on with my life. I'm diagnosed with severe lupus, an autoimmune disease, and severe endometriosis. I was literally carried out of the clinic I was working on in a stretcher and could not breathe from the very severe lupus, pleuritis, or chest pains. So Matthew and Dr. Frank, my world came crashing down, and I said, these are the trials of Job in my life. But bit by bit, I saw glimmers of hope. After proving my innocence to the IRS, I was granted an innocent spouse verdict and giving them pages of information that I had nothing to do with this. I was able to support myself doing mobile insurance physicals. Now, after many years of doing this, I met a man, so many years went by, okay, and I met a man who was very quiet and subdued, unlike what I had been used to, and we began dating. And I was attracted to him because he was quiet. Again, little did I know that it would be a worse wolf in sheep's clothing. This ended up being a huge mistake, number 2, because I didn't think anything could get much worse than the first marriage, but it did. Once married, I went through living hell with his mom, who did not want him to remarry. And he'd do nothing to appease the situation. I just wanted to plain meet with her, let her get to know me, walk in love. And this created a lot of tension between my husband and myself. This husband was exceedingly stubborn. He showed no empathy for me, no understanding, and refused systematically any sort of marital counseling. Now, the 2 bright lights to give both of you and your listeners a chance to come up for air in the saga is that after many years of not speaking to my mother, I called her and I told her, I forgive you. And she called and told me, well, God has been working on my heart, and he told me I never loved you and I never hugged you. Is that right? Now, Matthew and Dr. Frank, I thought how very pitiful, how sad, that a mother has to even ask this question. But there was so much more she did, but I was so happy that I had established a rapprochement with her and felt that a half of a loaf was better than none. So in the process of forgiving my mother, my severe and painful lupus symptoms went away, and I didn't have to take any more of the disease-remittive medication. So there was such power in forgiveness. The second point was Bob, my second spouse, directed me to guide dogs of the blind up in Portland, where we had been living at the time, to get a retired guide dog to share my life with, because I was never allowed to have dogs in childhood and so desperately wanted one to love. And as it turns out, and you will hear, my golden retrievers became my total emotional support and source of unconditional love. God used them powerfully in my life to give me so much what I desperately needed. And I trained most of them to become emotional support dogs, and so we could go in and help people in the hospitals. Bob, in the meantime, has difficulty staying at one job, and we moved constantly. Some, but not all of this, was due to the economic environment we were living in. But he would ask me to talk to his employers twice on his behalf, which was pretty unusual, I felt, for a man to do. And I, in the meantime, just went on to get counseling, just helping people wherever I could, at church, women's shelters, just being a listening, supportive ear, taking my Goldens into the hospitals. Okay, so when we initially moved to Phoenix in 2010, I could not have been happier, Matthew and Dr. Frank. I could not have been happier. I was speaking on the 700 Club. I was speaking at churches and venues and telling people to hold on to hope. I had written a book, Lessons from the Fiery Furnace. I got a job teaching medical assistants at a local college up here and was able to take my golden retrievers up to see my mom. So life seemed pretty good for those 2 months. And then Bob comes home one day from work and tells me, guess where we're moving? And I go, moving? Oh, I was shocked to hear we'd be moving again. We just moved to Phoenix in 2010. And I happened to just guess New Zealand. And I was right, unfortunately. Bob decided that we had to totally uproot our life here in America and go to Christchurch, New Zealand to help out with the earthquake. Now, I was totally opposed to this, Matthew and Dr. Frank, for many reasons. For 2 months, my life was going well, as I was telling you. And my mom was diagnosed with cancer at the same time. And, it was like, no, that makes no sense. I begged Bob with everything in me, please find another position in America. Let me help you look. No, it was his way or the highway. So he goes off to New Zealand and leaves me with everything, doing a, quote, estate sale to get rid of all of our furniture and belongings and beginning the very long and expensive quarantine and all the shots you have to get. In the meantime, Bob Skypes me from New Zealand, being wined and dined by people while I'm doing all this. Now, Air New Zealand was totally opposed to taking my dog in the cabin. And they said, there's no way we're going to take your dogs in the cabin, even though they're emotional support. And I said, look, there's no way I'm going to go on a 31-hour chain of custody from LAX to Auckland, even though the trip is just 17 hours. I said, look, Lord, I'm throwing myself on the floor. If you want me to go, you got to make this happen. Well, as it turns out, one phone call to the United States Department of Transportation made it possible, because this was international airspace, not New Zealand. And they had to take my dogs in the cabin, who were better behaved than the children in the airplane. Now, I did not know, we're winding this up here, I did not know the deep black hole New Zealand would be until I got there. For one, everything was so expensive, and Bob racked up $100,000 in debt by just moving there and living there. But in addition to this, the area he moved us to was very provincial. And the pastor of this one local church we attended was appalled that I was, quote, a missionary doctor, and immediately rejected me. Not that I walked in and announced it. Somebody had found out what I did and told him, and he was really upset about this. Now, I didn't quite understand this, but especially with the earthquake and everything was going on and all the things that happened from it. But Bob, again, was no support whatsoever in this, despite my pleas to just be of some help to appease the situation. So this was all surreal. So the pastor ends up lavishing favor on Bob and rejecting me. And you've got this unhealthy dynamic and dichotomy of everybody liking Bob and rejecting me because they would follow like in lockstep with what the pastor said. So Bob, in the meantime, is as happy as a clam with this setup and demonstrates, again, no empathy, no compassion, support, or understanding for me. In addition, one of my golden retrievers, Chip, died there very unexpectedly and suddenly, which was totally heartbreaking for me. To sum this all up, 2 major events happened there, and I fled with my life back to the United States at the end of 2012. The first was one night, very late, Bob said it was a mistake for him to move to New Zealand, got frustrated, smashed his computer on the floor, and said he was going to go out and get drunk and perhaps do himself harm. This was like 11 o'clock at night. I was just stunned at this, Matthew and Dr. Frank, just stunned. And I called the people in the church home group for help. They were no help at all. They thought I was making this up. After he left the home, I went out looking for him from bar to bar, only to find him stone drunk on the beach. The next morning, I just pleaded with him, please, for the love of God, just clear my name with the church. He refused to do this, which was extremely hurtful and selfish. And to this day, they continue to believe that I made this lie up. The final straw comes when I'm going to meet a very public speaker in Sydney, Australia, who was one of my mentors at a conference. Long and short of this horrific story, Bob prohibited me from meeting the man in a suitable manner and did everything to sabotage the meeting he could think of. Importantly, in New Zealand, I Skyped my best friend back in the United States, and she had asked me if I'd seen the movie Rain Man, which I had not. Because Bob's disconnection, his total lack of empathy and understanding of my needs, the narcissism, the personal chaos he caused, and the lack of interpersonal awareness reminded her of someone with autism. Well, I had had enough at that point. I took my last remaining golden retriever, Honey Bear, and fled back to the United States. And during that time, I was able to see my mother with Alzheimer's who died in my arms. But finally, after many years of suffering both mentally and physically, coupled with Bob's refusal to get counseling, I found a book called Life with a Partner or Spouse with Asperger, Going Over the Edge. I consulted the psychologist who wrote this book, and she and one other counselor told me to separate from Bob, that I'd been living in a black hole, to go on with my life and to stop this cycle of abuse and detach. And they were both emphatic about it. Furthermore, they both agreed it was next to impossible to live with a spouse with autism or autism spectrum and the severe psychological oppression that ensues. That's what I was told by them, and they were both specialists in spouses as adults married to people with autism or Asperger's. I finally got Bob to read the book, and he says this fits him to a T. He was just too stubborn for 26 years to ever take a look at himself. So subsequently, I decided to separate from Bob and take my life back. And in this process, my beloved golden retriever became such a valuable part of my healing journey, which I wrote a book about her called Jessie's Story. Her unconditional love carried me through until she had to be euthanized, which was, of course, extremely painful for me. In this separation, Bob has come to terms with the immensely destructive force he's been in my life. And so I learned the very painful lesson my father had warned me about, to not put my life in someone else's hands. And so now I desire to use my pain to help other people and to encourage anyone who may feel hopeless or helpless that, my God, if I can get through this, what can you get through?
It's so difficult for a lot of people, and maybe we start with this, okay? Because there's layers of abuse that are occurring in your life, and you're seemingly a really intelligent woman. You're exposed. I mean, you think about the arsenal of people you have around you. There's a lot of probably really smart people around you, and none of them are in your ear that the stuff you're doing is bad, or are the people in your life just that good at hiding it?
I would say it was totally not on their radar.
Because if it was, they would have probably, said something. And then you, because you had grown up with it, right? You had this mother who basically, oh man, did she prepare you in a lot of awful ways for all the things that were going to happen to you. But man, it's really difficult for some people to understand how somebody just cannot get out of that cycle. And you even said it a couple of times in your dialogue there. You kind of said, like, it never occurred to me that I could just get up and walk away.
Right.
That's, I think, where I want to start. And Dr. Frank, maybe you can jump in. Christina, maybe you can jump in. But why? Why do we keep making up all these excuses and reasons why we need to stay in this thing? Because I will tell you that I feel vehemently that family isn't enough. It's not enough just to be my mom or my dad or my brother or my sister. You don't get to abuse me in these ways.
Right.
How do we help people get out of their own cycle?
Well, I just want to say that this is a very bizarre story, to say the least. Let's be honest. And so in this process, if something doesn't seem right, then it's because it isn't. So get out. Give yourself permission to leave that situation. The importance of what you even talked about in one of your segments, Matthew, the importance of boundaries and self-care. Mm-hmm. So important. Yeah. But you saw this dutiful girl that felt duty bound to have to be just do everything right.
All right, Dr. Frank, I can't wait to find out what's on your mind.
I don't know, Christina, if this is exactly it for you, because there can be lots of reasons why, someone kind of stays in a situation or a pattern for a long time. But it's not uncommon to see these kinds of things continue into adulthood when they start so early, because it's like, well, this is all I know, right? The person, your mother, who is in theory supposed to love you the most, if she can treat me this way, then maybe this is just how people treat other people.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
So how do you get people to believe and understand that there's another way? Because you and I all know that when you're in it, you are in it. And there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. There doesn't seem to be a way out. Everybody else that found themselves getting out of it, they were lucky. They had something happen to them. I'm not going to be the one that gets out of it. So how do you convince people? Like, what did it take for you, Christina? What did it take for you to finally go, all right, I can't be around this anymore?
This lady who wrote this book, Dr. Marshak, literally, I'm telling you the truth, yelled at the top of her lungs to me on the consult I did with her on the, you don't know what a black hole you're living in. You've got to get out of this. Listen to me. And then I read her book. And then the other counselor who deals with adult Asperger's, autism people who are with the marriage type thing, she told me the same thing. And so I said, and plus none of this, after being dragged through the mud and going through so many physical health problems and everything, as a result of all this, I knew that, sometimes fear keeps you in these dark places. And you need to know that you can reclaim your life and that restoration is possible.
Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I absolutely agree, right? There needs to be that belief that there can be something different, something better on the other side before we ever take that step. Unfortunately, a lot of times when we have somebody in our life that is abusive, a lot of times, and Matthew, you kind of alluded to it, are these people just that good? A lot of times, for a lot of people, that is the case, right? They're really good at turning other people against you, right? And you feel like if I leave this person, I'm going to be left with no one, right? They're going to kind of win the divorce, if you will, and I'm going to be left with no one.
Bingo. As a matter of fact, Dr. Frank, I'm so glad you brought up, because that's what gaslighting is. Mm-hmm. Bob gaslit my entire family, all my other brothers, into thinking that something was wrong with me and he was okay until just last year when he wrote them a letter of really what the time of day was. And they're all like, oh, and I don't know if this is a male thing or, I don't know. But yeah, no, after being gaslit for so many years, I just had to pull away from this for my sanity. And I'm so glad I did. And your listeners need to know that they can take their life back. They don't have to live in fear. That having boundaries is very important. Having self-care and self-compassion is important.
Yeah, it is. And there's another part of your story that I would love to spend some time on, because it's something that I just believe in my whole heart. And we're starting to see a lot more research that's coming out. But it's just all about how the kind of stuff that we're living in and how that's affecting our bodies physically. For me, I know a lot of stress that I put on my body for years and years and years manifested into this back pain that I had that eventually I had to get surgery on, right? I think for me, as an outsider with that view, it's very easy for me to look at you, Christina, and understand why you got lupus, understand why these diseases started to happen to you, because you were really under an enormous amount of stress from jump. And your body was going, hold on, you're going to need to take care of me at some point, right?
Yes.
Do you feel that?
I do. As a matter of fact, I have a book here by this Dr. Bessel van der Kolk or something that says your body keeps the score.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Oh, yes, definitely. I felt that. Oh, yes, I suffered quite a lot. And to be honest with both you gentlemen, I've got PTSD from this. I would be lying to you if I told you I don't. I do, but I try to manage it, but I do.
And then isn't it also kind of a bummer, right, Frank? Because you probably see this more than I do because of the, your line of work. But oftentimes then, okay, so then you get sick, right? Or you feel crappy. Then that can almost be your value. And you can almost start to get that story winding up in your head where you're like, all right, well, this is what I'm worth. This is what I deserve. This is, and that can be a pretty dark place. So, I mean, maybe we pass out a tool or two, Dr. Frank, to step out of that place.
I think, anytime you ask me these questions, they're such good questions. But I always want to go back to what I think step one of the process that leads to that answer is. And, there's so many times where we are likely to avoid the possibility that something mental or emotional is contributing to the physical thing that I'm experiencing. And so you'll go for blood tests and x-rays and all of these kinds of things, never once thinking that even something just as simple as, stress, like we all live with stress. Obviously traumatic stress is even different. Abuse is even different, but we have to open our mind to the possibility that something mental or emotional is contributing to the physical before we're ever going to find a way to get out of it.
I'll tell you, as a guy who went through this whole ordeal, man, my rule with everybody right now is number one, rule out any physical manifestation of this thing, like meaning go in and have your MRI. And if there's something wrong structurally, then there's something wrong. That's a different thing. Yeah. But, there's about 10 million people that have a backache. They think they have a disc issue. They think they got it's what's going on up here that you got to settle down. And then all of that stuff will start to calm down just as much.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, we have a medical doctor here, so I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I think I can confidently say, even things like digestive issues, they are very commonly, if there's not, like you said, a very obvious physical reason or whatever, a lot of times it's stress induced, or at least stress exacerbated. I'll let the MD let me know if I'm on the right track or not.
Absolutely. 100% bingo. You are very much so. The vagus nerve, the gut, the limbic system, it's all connected. Mm-hmm. It just all is. Now, one thing I do want to say for me, so there very much is a correlation, is for me, I have to say quietly that it was replacing lies about myself, the condemnation, and just with the truth of, to be quite honest with you, with what God's word said about me. So I would just read things my girlfriends would give me. Well, this is who God says you are. You don't have to believe the lies that you're worthless, that you're this, that you're that you're all these negative things. Because how does somebody come out of that?
Yeah, this is the strength of faith, right? For a lot of people, this is the strength of faith, is that it helps them lean into that a lot more.
Right.
Did you have girlfriends along the way, Christina, that were encouraging you to make different choices? Or was there anybody along the way that was in your ear? Because we had a woman in series 1 in Heather. She had a sister. And Heather's sister was vehement that she get out of this relationship at almost every turn. And she never listened to her sister until. Was there ever anybody like that for you?
Well, it was Kathy in New Zealand, the lady who told me about Rain Man. Mm-hmm.
This is a hard thing for people that have been through traumatic experiences to really understand, or maybe people that haven't. But for my own traumatic experience, my dad dying when I was 23, witnessing that, being there in that moment, having to deal with that whole thing, okay? Right. Eventually, you have to get to a point where something like that, where you say, why did that happen for me? And you have to flip the script. It can't be, why did it happen to me? You eventually have to figure out, why did it happen, so that I can set it down and move on with this thing. So, my goodness, with all of the things that happened to you, Christina, why did they happen for you?
It was for the exact reason you're saying. Your entire podcast is about helping people who are traumatized and marginalized and feeling hopeless and helpless. And the very thing that grabbed me when I heard about you leaving radio broadcasting after 26 years was the very sentence that just grabbed me out of my chair, was Dr. Frank's words. There is something about these people who we talk to that they have an inner resilience. They have they're not giving up. I forgot exactly your words, but it just literally, just made me contact you right away to let your listeners know that your setbacks can become your comebacks, your tests can become your testimonies, your mess can become your message. Not just magic, but with the right help, good counselors, this podcast, your faith, it all works together to help people just get better. And there's hope. And that's why you're doing this, Matthew, to let people know who are suffering out there to have hope and don't give up. Who knows who could be listening to any one of your many podcasts on these on your series, who may be just between here and there of giving up. Mm-hmm. So my whole thing is to use my pain for a purpose.
Well, I'm sorry you had to go through all those things, but thank you for sharing your journey with us so that we can learn a little bit from it.
Well, people have a choice, and then by just listening to your podcast, they're making a choice to go in the right direction. So I want to thank you both very, very much. And just really bless you for all the work you're doing to help people. And if I can be used in any way, whatever, to just help people or talk to them as a result of my segment, you've got my email, you've got my, phone number, whatever. Not as a counselor, not as a coach, just as a human being.
I'd like to end with a moment of vulnerability, if you'll allow it. And that is for you to give us, Christina, a little bit of why you stayed in it for so long, the real reason.
I think fear of being left alone. And could I make it on my own? Fear.
Well, Dr. Frank, a lot to her story, and another example of what you see as a child is a lot of what you'll put up with as an adult. And if you ask me, just another nudge for every single person listening who's got kids to stop that stuff and break the generational cycles and just stop continuing this tragic cycle of abuse, because it's unbelievable how many people experience it.
Well, and I think you used the correct phrase, right? Put up with. We set young people up to put up with or expect some sort of minimum standard. And unfortunately, there are some people out there who are in an unhealthy space themselves who set a really low bar for what young people are going to grow up to expect, because it's entirely too common. If you meet someone in adulthood who is stuck in a cycle of not great decisions, not great relationships, whatever, it's amazing how many times that started when they were too young to even know that there were different things out there.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Hi, it's Tim.
And Beth from the Mulhausen Group Real Estate.
Thank you for listening to Learn from People Who Lived It.
You can find them online at tmgphoenix.com. Thank you so much for spending a little time with us. We're about to listen to the lead track off the new album from Blaine Long called Bacon. A quick reminder that asi-av.com, that's that audio-visual company I was telling you about. This woman-owned company has more than 2 decades of experience, and if you're on the IT staff and you've got your next build-out, please reach out to these folks. They work with schools, they work with corporations, they work with just about everybody, and they pay really close attention to that last 5%. Visit them online at asi-av.com. Okay, Blaine Long and Bacon off the new album, Royal.
She bit my heart, she didn't break it. Well, she took a big bite, said it tastes like bacon. Lips like Presley, moves like Elvis. You forget about your heart when she shakes her pelvis. Hey. Oh, we got nights of dreaming, wings to fly. Still young, but not tonight. I wouldn't have it any other way. We got gravy boats and mortgage payments. It's been so long since I've seen the rain. It's where I'll be when I die. It's where I'll be when I die. We got nights of dream and wings to fly. We're still young, but not tonight. I wouldn't have it any other way.